In 1953, the American administration of the time did something that the government would not officially admit for over the next 60 years. It is said that the administration of the time paid a foreign mob, bribed generals, and engineered the collapse of a democratically elected government, all to protect oil. That single covert act, apparently carried out in the dusty streets of Tehran on a sweltering August day, planted a seed of rage so deep, so generational, that it would take root and bloom into one of the most dangerous rivalries the modern world has ever known. Today, the United States and Iran are bitter enemies. They have exchanged sanctions, real and proxy wars, assassinations, and the constant shadow of nuclear catastrophe. Millions of lives across the Middle East hang in the balance of their conflict. But how exactly did two countries that were once fairly close allies become the fiercest of enemies? The answer to this question is not found in a war rooms. It does not come from religious texts, nor does it come from the United Nations or NATO. The answers can be traced back to the boardrooms of an Anglo-Persian oil company and the quiet offices of the Central Intelligence Agency. Keep watching, because by the end of this video, you will understand why whatever happened in Tehran in 1953 still echoes in every headline about the Middle East today, and why the hatred between these two nations may be far more complicated than you ever imagined. Let's first begin the story from the time when these two countries were actually friends. In the early 20th century, Iran, then known as Persia, was not America's enemy. It was not even a rival. It was barely on Washington's radar. Iran was a country of immense ancient civilization, home to one of the oldest cultures on Earth, with poetry, philosophy, and architecture that predated the United States by thousands of years. But in the modern era, it was trapped between two hungry colonial powers, Britain to the south and Russia to the north, both of whom had been extracting Persian wealth for over a century. When World War II broke out, Allied forces, British and Soviet, occupied Iran to secure vital supply routes to Russia. The young Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, was installed on the throne by these foreign powers in 1941, replacing his father who had shown sympathy toward Nazi Germany. America, entering the scene with its Marshall Plan idealism and anti-colonial rhetoric, initially looked like something different. President Franklin Roosevelt met with the Shah. American advisors arrived to help modernize the country. America positioned itself as the alternative to tired European empire. Iranians, having been exhausted from a century of being treated as a prize to be divided by foreigners, were cautiously hopeful. America felt different. America felt like a genuine friend. But hope, in geopolitics, is a fragile and often short-lived thing. Beneath Iran's soil lay one of the largest oil reserves on the planet. The British had known this since 1908, when the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, a company later renamed British Petroleum, the same BP you see on fuel stations today, struck oil in the southwestern province of Khuzestan. For 4 decades, Britain had extracted Iranian oil under a contract so lopsided it bordered on institutional theft. Iran received roughly 16% of the profits from its own natural resources. Britain kept the rest. Iranian workers at the Abadan refinery, which was the largest oil refinery in the entire world at the time, lived in squalid conditions without running water, while British managers enjoyed private clubs, swimming pools, and a lifestyle of colonial leisure in the Iranian heat. The anger was building quietly, year after year, in the hearts of millions of Iranians. And into that anger stepped one extraordinary man. Mohammad Mosaddegh was not a revolutionary in the guerrilla sense. He was an elderly, European-educated aristocrat who sometimes wore pajamas to press conferences and wept openly when he spoke of his country's humiliation. But he carried an idea so radical, so threatening to Western powers, that it would eventually cost him everything. He believed that Iranian oil belonged to Iranians. In April 1951, the Iranian parliament voted unanimously to nationalize the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. Mossadegh was appointed prime minister. The crowds in Tehran erupted. This was not merely a political moment, it felt like a national resurrection. For the first time in living memory, Iranians felt they were the masters of their own destiny. Britain was furious. Unwilling to accept the loss of its most profitable overseas asset, the British government immediately imposed a crippling economic blockade. They pressured Western allies to boycott Iranian oil. They froze Iranian assets in British banks. They sent warships to the Persian Gulf. They took the matter to the United Nations. And then, they went to their American allies with a proposition. Initially, President Harry Truman was unconvinced. America had spent years preaching self-determination and criticizing European colonialism. Helping Britain overturn an elected government felt deeply hypocritical. But then Dwight Eisenhower became president in January 1953, and his CIA director was Allen Dulles, and the British returned, this time with a different argument, one perfectly engineered for the paranoid Cold War atmosphere America was living in. They told the Americans, Mossadegh is opening the door to Soviet communism. If Iran falls to Moscow, the Soviets reach the Persian Gulf. The free world cannot afford to lose Iran. It was a masterpiece of geopolitical manipulation. Mossadegh was not a communist. He was a committed nationalist Democrat. But in 1953, with McCarthyism raging and the Korean War fresh, America heard the word communist and its moral calculus collapsed entirely. Operation Ajax, as America called it, or Operation Boot, as the British preferred, was given the green light. The CIA was about to commit an act that would haunt American foreign policy for the next 70 years. The operation was run by a man named Kermit Roosevelt Jr., the grandson of President Theodore Roosevelt, who entered Iran under a false identity and began spending CIA money with ruthless efficiency. He paid Iranian newspaper editors to print fabricated anti-Mossadegh stories. He hired thugs to pose as Mossadegh supporters and commit acts of violence in the streets to make the Prime Minister look dangerous and out of control. He bribed military officers. He even organized fake communist attacks on mosques to inflame religious Iranians against the secular Mossadegh. The operation nearly failed. A first attempt on August 15th collapsed when loyalist soldiers remained faithful to Mossadegh's government. Roosevelt's superiors ordered him to abort. He refused. 4 days later, on August 19, 1953, paid mobs swept through Tehran. Military units whose commanders had been bribed moved against the government. They attacked Mossadegh's home, government buildings, newspaper offices, and the residences of his allies. By nightfall, it was over. Mossadegh surrendered. He was arrested in his pajamas, the same pajamas he sometimes wore to press conferences, now a final, poignant symbol of his unconventional dignity. He was tried for treason and sentenced to 3 years in prison, then placed under house arrest for the rest of his life. He died in 1967, never leaving his estate again. America had just destroyed the only functioning democracy in the Muslim Middle East to protect oil profits. Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was restored to the peacock throne. He understood precisely who had returned him to power. He moved quickly to reward them. American and British oil companies were given 40% of Iran's oil concessions. He signed military agreements with Washington. He became, in the language of the era, America's policeman of the Middle East. For the next 26 years, the Shah ruled with increasing authoritarianism. His secret police force, the Savak, trained by the CIA and Israel's Mossad, imprisoned, tortured, and disappeared thousands of Iranians who dared to criticize the government. America said nothing. America sold him F-14 Tomcat fighter jets, the most advanced combat aircraft of the era. America provided weapons, intelligence sharing, and political legitimacy. America celebrated him at state dinners and praised his White Revolution modernization programs. But underground, in mosques, in basement meetings, in the writings of an exiled cleric named Ruhollah Khomeini being smuggled back home on cassette tapes, a revolution was being assembled, piece by piece. By the late 1970s, the Shah's Iran had become a pressure cooker. There was oil wealth, ostentatious, Western-style wealth concentrated among elites, but it sat beside grinding poverty, brutal political repression, and a culture war as rapid forced westernization clashed violently with deep Iranian and Islamic identity. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini had been in exile since 1964, first in Iraq, then in a small house in Neaufleux-le-Château, France. From this quiet suburb of Paris, he gave fiery interviews that were recorded onto cassette tapes and smuggled back into Iran by the tens of thousands. In the information-controlled Islamic world of the 1970s, a cassette tape was among the most revolutionary weapons ever deployed. In January 1979, the Shah fled Iran. The most powerful American-backed ruler in the region boarded a plane and never returned home. A man with no army, no weapons, and no formal government, just his voice on a cassette tape, had toppled a king backed by the most powerful nation on earth. On February 1, 1979, Ayatollah Khomeini landed in Tehran. 5 million people lined the roads and filled the squares to witness his return. It remains one of the largest human gatherings in recorded history. What had been America's closest Middle Eastern ally had, in the space of weeks, become its most passionate ideological enemy. On November 4, 1979, a group of Iranian university students, calling themselves the Students Following the Line of the Imam, stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran and seized 66 American diplomats and staff as hostages. Their stated trigger? America had just admitted the Shah into the United States for medical treatment. To many Iranians, this felt like America sheltering the man responsible for decades of torture and repression, and possibly planning to restore him to power, exactly as it had in 1953. The hostages were held for 444 days. It was the longest diplomatic hostage crisis in American history. Images of blindfolded Americans, of burning flags, of screaming crowds outside the embassy compound. These images played on American television screens every single night. America was humiliated in front of the entire world. And Americans, who knew almost nothing of 1953, of the CIA coup, of the Savak torture, could not understand why. For Americans, November 4, 1979 was the day Iran became the enemy. For Iranians, the enemy had been America since August 19, 1953. The two nations were arguing from entirely different starting points in history, and they still are today. Before we continue, pause for just one moment. You are halfway through one of the most important hidden stories of the past century. A story that explains so much of what you see in today's headlines and social media. If this video is giving you some clarity, if it's helping you understand why the world looks the way it does, please take 10 seconds right now and share it with someone who needs to hear this. A friend, a classmate, a family member. This kind of history changes how people think. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Every week on The Fascinating Origin of Things, we go deep into the hidden history of how our world came to be, from the origin of democracy, to the origin of money, to the origin of the internet, to stories like this one. We don't simplify. We don't sensationalize. We follow the truth wherever it leads, and you deserve the full picture. Now, back to Iran. Because what happens next gets even darker, even more consequential, and directly explains why the newspapers look the way they do right now. Just months after the hostage crisis began, Saddam Hussein, the Iraqi leader, launched a full-scale invasion of Iran on September 22, 1980. He calculated that revolutionary Iran, with its purged military and international isolation, would collapse within weeks. What he got instead was 8 years of one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. Historians estimate up to 1 million people died, soldiers and civilians on both sides. Chemical weapons were used on a massive scale. Children were sent into minefields clutching plastic keys, symbolically unlocking paradise. And here is the part that is almost never stated plainly. America actively supported Saddam Hussein throughout most of this war. In 1983, President Reagan dispatched Special Envoy Donald Rumsfeld to Baghdad. Rumsfeld shook Saddam's hand and delivered a message of American support. This at a time when the Reagan administration's own internal memos confirmed that Iraq was using chemical weapons against Iranian soldiers and Kurdish civilians. America provided satellite reconnaissance showing Iranian troop positions. American banks extended billions in agricultural and trade credits. American companies, operating through foreign subsidiaries, provided the chemical precursors used to manufacture the nerve agents killing Iranian soldiers. America did not merely watch the Iran-Iraq War. America chose a side, and that side was Saddam Hussein. Iranians watched hundreds of thousands of their sons die, while the country that had overthrown their democracy in 1953 now supplied the weapons killing their children. There is no historical accounting for what that does to a nation's collective memory. On July 3, 1988, as the war was in its final months, the USS Vincennes, an American warship operating in the Persian Gulf, shot down Iran Air Flight 655. All 290 people aboard were killed. The overwhelming majority were Iranian civilians. 66 of the dead were children. The United States government maintained it was a tragic case of mistaken identity, that the crew believed the civilian Airbus A300 was an attacking military aircraft. No one in the chain of command faced a court-martial. The captain of the Vincennes was later awarded a Combat Action Ribbon. To Iranians, this was not a mistake. It was a massacre, one that was never genuinely acknowledged and never adequately apologized for. After the Islamic Revolution, Iran continued developing its nuclear program, ironically built upon the very same research reactors and technology that America had gifted the Shah under President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace initiative in the 1950s. In January 2002, President George W. Bush stood before the United States Congress and delivered his State of the Union address. He named Iran as part of what he called an axis of evil, alongside Iraq and North Korea, accusing these nations of seeking weapons of mass destruction and sponsoring terrorism. For Iran's reformist President Mohammad Khatami, who had quietly assisted America with intelligence cooperation after the September 11th attacks, and who had overseen Iranian citizens holding candlelight vigils in solidarity with American victims, the speech was a stunning and humiliating betrayal. The moderate voices inside Iran who had advocated for engagement with the West were instantly marginalized. The hardliners were vindicated. Why extend a hand to America, they argued, if America calls you evil regardless? For the next 2 decades, the United States imposed successive waves of economic sanctions on Iran, the most comprehensive sanctions architecture ever constructed against any nation in history. They targeted banking, oil exports, aviation, and even medical supplies. They did not topple the Iranian government, but they did devastate the lives of ordinary Iranian citizens. Iran responded with its own escalation across the region. It deepened its support for Hezbollah in Lebanon, for Hamas in Gaza, for the Houthi movement in Yemen, and for Shia militias in Iraq. It accelerated uranium enrichment to levels that alarmed the international community. The spiral tightened. In 2015, after years of painstaking diplomacy, the Obama administration, alongside China, Russia, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, negotiated the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal. Iran agreed to dramatic limits on its nuclear program in exchange for substantial sanctions relief. For a fragile moment, it seemed possible that 70 years of accumulated bitterness might be slowly, carefully unwound. In May 2018, President Trump announced America's unilateral withdrawal from the agreement. He reimposed maximum pressure sanctions, sanctions far harsher than anything before them. Iran's moderates were once again destroyed politically. Uranium enrichment resumed and accelerated, and the cycle began again. On January 3, 2020, an American MQ-9 Reaper drone struck a convoy near Baghdad International Airport and killed Major General Qasem Soleimani, the commander of Iran's elite Quds force and one of the most powerful military figures in the entire Middle East. For America, Soleimani was a designated terrorist, the architect of Iran's regional proxy network, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American soldiers through his support of Iraqi militia attacks. For Iran, Soleimani was a national hero, a celebrated general who had fought Iraq when America was supplying Saddam with chemical weapons. His body was returned to Iran for burial. His funeral procession drew millions into the streets in city after city. It was among the largest mourning gatherings in human history. America eliminated one man. Iran inherited a martyr whose face now hangs in millions of homes across the Middle East. Iran retaliated within days with a barrage of ballistic missiles targeting American military facilities in Iraq. More than 100 American service members were diagnosed with traumatic brain injuries. The region held its breath for a war that, this time, felt terrifyingly close. In 2013, the Obama administration released declassified CIA documents that confirmed what Iranians had known and believed and built their entire national narrative around for 60 years. America had, in fact, organized and executed the 1953 coup that overthrew Mohammad Mosaddegh. The documents confirmed every detail: the paid mobs, the bribed newspaper editors, the fabricated communist threat, the military officers on CIA payroll. All of it, funded by American taxpayers, carried out in the name of freedom, and catastrophic for the freedom of millions of Iranians for the generations that followed. Today, the United States and Iran remain locked in a posture of mutual hostility that shapes the entire Middle East and touches the lives of hundreds of millions of people. The sanctions continue, the proxy conflicts continue, the nuclear brinkmanship continues, the rhetoric of mutual demonization continues. And at the center of all of it, beneath all the nuclear negotiations and drone strikes and embassy attacks and burning flags, is a story that did not begin with a revolution, or a hostage crisis, or a nuclear facility. It began with a democratically elected prime minister in pajamas who believed his country's oil should belong to his country's people. He was not wrong. He was simply standing in the way of very powerful interests. And that, perhaps more than any religious difference, any cultural gap, any political ideology, is the fascinating, heartbreaking, still unresolved origin of the enmity between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran. If this video made you think, if it helped you see one of the world's great conflicts in a new and more complete light, that is exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to understand this story. Drop a comment below, we read every single one. And tell us, what origin story do you want us to explore next? History is not the past. History is the present, explaining itself. See you in the next one.